All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Beth. We're just going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Good evening, wherever you may be. Delighted to have 45 minutes with you today to have a conversation as much as we can in this hybrid environment to talk about from ideals of equity to equity in practice. I'm Greg Yao. I'm the president of the Center for Research Libraries here in Chicago. That's the Chicago Loop behind me. It's a beautiful day, but a cold day. Feels very wintry here in Chicago. And joined here with Emily Farrell, who is the Library Partnerships and Sales Lead at the MIT Press. And then also Beth Blanton, who's the Director of Collections at the University of Virginia Library. And Beth is not officially part of the panel, but she is part of the panel, and that she's going to help us with all logistics and Q&A moderating and just help make sure that everything goes off smoothly. And Beth, unlike Emily, who is in Los Angeles, and myself, who I'm in Chicago, Beth is actually right around the corner from y'all. She's there in Charleston. So let's talk a little bit about how we're structuring today's conversation, because Emily and I, in planning this, how best to leverage our 45 minutes together, really want to have as much as possible a conversation with each other and a conversation with you about equity from ideals and values to practice and academic publishing. And the best way we thought to do this would be to talk about, to go from specific to the large, and really talk about how the MIT Press is approaching open access. Talk specifically about some really exciting work that Emily has been leading over the last several months, launching a new open access business model for monographs, the MIT Direct to Open model. And then really use those experiences as a vehicle to explore larger dynamics in academic publishing around library and publishing partnerships, and how we all work together to create more equitable systems for knowledge creation. So we're going to hand it over to Emily to talk about MIT Press, talk about Direct to Open, her work with Direct to Open. Then she's going to hand it over to me, and I'm going to do a little bit of framing from a research library perspective. And then we're going to run through some questions with each other, and hopefully with you, if the format works for us, so we can really explore what equity is in theory and in values, and then also in practice when it comes to academic publishing. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Emily.
Thanks so much, Greg. And thanks everyone for being here. For those of you that are sitting on chairs in the room in Charleston, that's very exciting. And also to see that there's a good number of people joining virtually, which is wonderful. Just some brief background on the MIT Press and what we're doing with open access to start with. As you're likely aware, the MIT Press has been around since the early 60s, and we're a large university press, and we publish books and journals, particularly at the intersection of science, technology, art, social science, and design. So, we tend towards publishing more sort of STEM and STEAM leaning works than a lot of other university presses. It's one of the things that distinguishes us as a press. So we have a very interdisciplinary focus. We're part of MIT as an institute, but also we're a library reporting press, which sort of factors into how we approach a number of things. The program that we publish at this stage is over 250 books a year, 40 journals. We publish textbooks and reference works, but we've also been working on some various initiatives in terms of more infrastructural investment. So you'd be aware of the Knowledge Futures Group and the PubPub platform that was an initiative with MIT Media Lab and the press, plus things like the MIT Press Reader, which it helps to syndicate content from our backfile out to a wider audience. For open access in particular, we've been growing what we do. We've been experimenting and working on access to digital content for a long time. So I think our first open access book, if you like, is something that was published in 1995, a book called City of Bits that had a digital version that was free to read. And we've continued on from there. Out of our journals, we have a good number that are hybrid, but more importantly, we're really growing what we do with Diamond Open Access. So that's where authors also don't pay to publish. There's no APCs. We've launched a few of those in recent years, and for Gold Open Access journals. In terms of books, it's been slightly more of a challenge. I think as most of you are aware, open access books present a different sort of challenge than journals. But so far what we've done is a lot of it's been BPC based, so asking funders or authors to cover the cost to make a work open. But we've also worked on initiatives like the Tome project towards an open monographs ecosystem, which is supported by a group of libraries that come together with presses focused particularly on first monographs. And that's been a very successful initiative that's in, I think it's 4th year at this stage. We also recently opened a number of books in urban studies and architecture thanks to Mellon Foundation funding. So, a small set of subject focused works. But really what we wanted to do with this new model that we received funding for in 2019 from Arcadia was to examine what we were doing with books and try to come to something that was more equitable for as we approach open access. And that's direct to open. So next slide, please. So direct to open is our new open access monographs model that we're in the process of implementing. We launched that earlier this year, and its aim is to open our frontlist monographs program, so that's around 90 books starting in 2022, through an incentivized library collective action model. And the idea there is that we're aware that book processing charges really just don't work. There are a number of reasons for that. Monographs are still very much, they are of most importance to the humanities and social sciences, and those disciplines tend to be the ones that have the least funding to support publishing. A book processing charge, it costs a lot of money. Most scholars, it's just too much of a challenge to reach it. So although we've been able to do things here and there, it's really not an equitable approach to opening content. So we're instead asking libraries to come together to support this open access model. We gathered a lot of data on our revenue sources for monographs, came to a threshold that we would need to make our program sustainable. And then we've distributed those costs across quite a granular fee structure for libraries. Libraries can choose to support either a humanities and social sciences collection, a STEAM collection, or the complete monographs collection of 90 books. And with that, they get the incentive of access to the back file of our monographs, which is around 2,500 books through the end of 2022. So there's an incentive, but there's also a contribution to the common good to open up these books. One sort of guarantee is if you commit to supporting the model, your library still has that access without having to pay the fee. And it's an annual commitment. So we didn't want to, especially now as budgets are very challenging, we didn't want to ask libraries to come on for more than a year, just because it seemed like a long commitment, but we have seen good response for commitments up to 3 years. We've also worked historically in collaboration with the MIT libraries in supporting open access books, and MIT libraries have provided some additional support for us to be able to lower fees for smaller institutions in the first year. So that provides additional help to make sure that we're presenting a model that's equitable in terms of authors not having to pay fees to open their books, but also that pays attention to the size and type of library, and that the smallest library will hopefully still be able to reach the fees for this model, all of which we have up on our website to see. So that's sort of the quick overview and how it works, and I'm happy to answer more questions, but I'll pass it now back to you, Greg, to give a bit of background on CRL.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Emily. I will say that for context, at MIT, the press and the library are part of the same administrative unit, so they're part of the same organization. And I first met Emily when I was working as the associate director for collections in the MIT libraries, and really trying to carve out parts of the collections budget at MIT to set aside funds to support open access publishing initiatives at the MIT Press. And I was thrilled to do that in an MIT context. And one of the reasons why I found the opportunity to join the Center for Research Libraries was to take that MIT as a microcosm, and that those experiments in relationship building and workflow sharing between the MIT Press and the MIT libraries to build more equitable academic publishing ecosystems, really take that microcosm and bring it to the CRL and use CRL as much as possible as a consortial platform to allow for these kinds of nonprofit publishers and research library collaborations writ large at scale. And so with that, I want to just talk about just sort of like a big picture framing that has been very helpful to me as a research library, trying to make sense of what's going on. What's going on in this whole research library environment and this whole push to digital. And I think that for much of my career, I finished library school in 1998. For much of my career, I thought in terms of a digital shift, the move to digital. And when I read this book by Matthew David a few years ago, he presented a framework that I thought was incredibly clarifying and helpful for me as a framework to make sense of my professional life. And he had this framing of a dual digital revolution, a dual revolution. So not a digital revolution, but adding a little bit more nuance to it and talking about two digital revolutions, and actually that are actually quite distinct and moving in different directions. The first, as you can see, he talks about one digital revolution is enabling technical locking down of access and distribution to content. So this would be gated content, gated publishing systems where there's content that's available digitally, but behind paywalls, right? So gated communities of content. And that resonated very strongly with me as a research librarian, because as a development librarian, as an AD for collections, so much of the resource allocation and investment in procuring collections for research for faculty and students is about navigating that licensing environment, that authentication environment, that whole environment where you have digital content that is locked down. But on the other hand, there was this other digital shift, where digital content is open. So this would be the institutional repository workflows, digital scholarship workflows, and just a whole sort of a different part of my professional life in terms of when I was an AD for collections at MIT. I had acquisitions librarians and e-resources librarians working on one side of this digital revolution, and then I had a whole other set of staff working in another, and it was almost like two different worlds entirely. And when I think about moving from ideals of equity to equity in practice, big picture, I always looked at it as trying to divert resources, whether it's attention or budget allocations or staff and workflows, from one side of that digital revolution to the other, trying to move it from the lockdown ecosystem to the open ecosystem. And that's one of the reasons why the experiment that Emily was just describing, that direct to open experiment, which is one of many similar kinds of open access experiments that different folks are pursuing in this environment, is so exciting, and it's to me a real measurable way of moving from equity from ideal to practice. With that, we want to use the rest of our time, which is the majority of our time, a half hour of our time, to explore together with you if the logistics work here, whether in chat. Really want to hear from you. But Emily and I have these 3 questions that we want to explore together and with you all as well, as much as possible, to really get at this journey from ideals to practice. Emily and I know could go. We wanted to start talking, so we wanted to frame it in this way. And with this, I just wanted to say, I'll turn over to Emily, and I'll ask you the first question, Emily, and you can turn it back to me. But what is equity to you, and what does it have to do with open access? How do you define these terms? How does this work?
Yeah, big question. And I have to say, in listening into all there's been some fantastic sessions so far this conference, and considering these definitions in the context of the conversations at Charleston this year, and also in what's been propelled forward in the last year and a half in terms of conversations around equity and social justice. I think what we're talking about is increased opportunity, increased access to resources, increased access and equitable or equal access to support, to be able to read and to publish your research as a researcher, and for publishers to consider how we ensure that our authors have those pathways. So in terms of what open access has to do with that equity, how do we ensure that we are hearing from as many voices as we can, and that we're not part of the sort of the barriers that are in place that prevent that access to producing and consuming knowledge.
Yeah, so I think that that's really helpful. So equity, from my perspective, equity is it's really everything. It's really everything. And I think that for me, my passion, and I'm by no means alone, many of our passion, it's advancing the values of diversity, inclusivity, and equity in research libraries and academic publishing and knowledge creation. And DEI is what most excites me and gives me joy in the work. But I want to say that equity, I left out, I left out the D in the I, the diversity inclusion, because for me, I don't really have much use for diversity on its own, right? Diversity on its own is diversity is representation of different kinds, right? Representation. It's important, but on its own, it doesn't really do a whole lot. Inclusivity is interesting, reaching out and bringing, making sure that you're aware of what voices are in the room and what voices aren't in the room, and taking active steps to have more voices in the room. That's important. But for me, diversity and inclusivity really doesn't work unless you have equity on top of it. And equity to me is being really mindful of power and power dynamics, and how power works through systems, and how power works to silence voices, or how or works to amplify voices. So equity is about power and in systems for me. And so equity, thinking about OA is really important, because one of the things I really like about these Charleston events is that you can just sort of share things sort of as they're happening real time. So a conversation that I had yesterday with a member of the CRL Collections and Services Committee was this. This is what the member of the committee said to me. We need to decolonize open access. CRL needs to take an open access stand and serve as a platform to decolonize open access. Because this APC model and this transformative agreement, the so-called transformative agreement model, it's not transformative. It's a very US and Western European model for open access. It excludes voices from the global South, and CRL needs to have an open access posture and needs to be active in that space. but we need to decolonize that space, right? And so decolonizing is being really mindful of systems of power, privilege, money, voice, and really trying to correct for it and build equity into OA. So I think that OA in and of itself is not an advancement of equity. It's how you advance OA that actually is really important. But you're nodding your head, Emily. What do you got? What are you thinking?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yes to all of that. I mean, I think that's why we need to talk about what the practice is. So what does that look like? How do we move from, I was listening in, I imagine others were there as well, the session earlier, DEI is not a webinar. And, to hear it, yes, it's important to educate and to do training and read the books, but we need to look at the concrete action that we're taking and examine, as you say, the power structures and what it is that we can do now and what we can sort of do moving forward, and as we continue to work towards more equitable systems, and that OA can be a part of that, but as you say, it isn't just an answer on its own. And I think that moves us quite reasonably, if that's okay, to the next question, the sort of what systemic changes might we implement in university presses to advance equity. And we were sort of thinking about the different ways, and I will throw this back at you from the library perspective in a moment, but I was thinking about, well, what is it that university presses can do? And I think that there are probably three central things, sort of broadly and then attached to concrete action. And one of the things, we talk about data a lot, and measurement. And I think in order to move forward, we need to measure, right? We need to know where we are. We need to know where we are and what we're doing, to know where we're not and where there's work that needs to be done. So, we can't move towards any sort of dismantling of power structures until we have a better idea of what we're missing and the ongoing work that needs to be done. And we are beginning some of that work at the press. I'm really pleased to say that there are an understanding of the assessment and the work that needs to be done at all levels. So not just in a broader training of the press, but what can our production department do? What can we do at all different levels? What can we do as we acquire books as a press? So measuring in order to know where we are and to move forward, but also to start now and to start where we are and at all levels and keep that work going. So some of the things we're doing, I mentioned earlier, models of open access that pay attention to both the ability to publish and to read content. So, diamond journals where there aren't any APCs, direct to open where authors don't have to find funding to publish open access. But not only that, as you say, it's not just that open access model, but things like, in our acquisitions department, we're starting to track author and reviewer demographics. We know that that's not uncomplicated because we have to be very careful about how we're gathering that data and storing that data. But we also we know that we need to, we publish in STEAM disciplines, and we know that we need to focus on bringing in more underrepresented authors, bringing in more Black authors, more broadly, people of colour that we have not been publishing enough. Ensuring that we're promoting and marketing our authors, particularly our authors of colour. We've started funds. We have a fund for diverse voices. We've developed bias-free language in manuscript editing in our editorial design and production department. Our journals department is also beginning to gather demographic data that we're developing more best practices for that. So we've also just developed a name change policy for authors. So these are the concrete initiatives that we're working on, but there's more measuring to do, I suppose, to know what more we can do. And then I think also we need to communicate better. It's a challenge as a smaller press to be able to say to the broad world, or even just to say to libraries, this is what we're doing. This is why what we do as university presses distinguishes us from perhaps larger commercial entities, and what we do and how we're values aligned that is somewhat different. So, that gets to the mission of the press, for instance. The mission of the press is to lead by pushing the boundaries of scholarly publishing in active partnership with the MIT community and aligned with MIT's mission to advance knowledge in science, technology, the arts, and other areas of scholarship that will best serve the nation and the world in the 21st century. And that's a mission statement that we return to very often in considering what we're doing from sort of an equitable approach. More collaboration with libraries and leveraging the scale of consortia, I think, is something that we also need to do. To recognise that we are leanly staffed in the ways that libraries often are, and to work together on that, I think, is incredibly important. I also see a note in the chat from Laura saying that you'd like to know more about our name change policy, and I will I'll look for the link so that you can take a look at that too. And then, I think that was the third point. I think there are a number of points in there all mixed together, but primarily I would say, we need to measure what we're doing. We need to act already where we can, and we need to communicate more broadly and cooperate more broadly with libraries in the ways that we're values aligned. And now with that, I will throw that back to you, Greg, and ask you, what do you think about the changes that can happen in research libraries?
So what changes that we should make in research libraries? No, the changes should come from your side. The research libraries, we're good. We're good.
It's all publishers' fault, isn't it?
Exactly. That's it. No, I appreciate that. I think that from the research library perspective, the things that could change, rather than point the finger at research libraries, I'll point the finger sort of at myself and sort of change the things I've learned over the years. I think one thing that's useful. A useful change is sort of is mental maps, understandings of the context. And I think that quote that I shared earlier about that dual digital revolution was really clarifying for me, because so much of my career was dedicated to building expertise and becoming very, very proficient in operating within a collections as procurement environment. So being able to manage budgets and negotiate for content, purchase content, get it activated within authentication systems, really being a proficient actor in that lockdown gated environment. That was how I spent most of the early part of my career. But if you ask me about open access or institutional repositories and this, and sort of how to navigate those areas of digital content at an operational level, that came to me very, very, very late. And I think it was late for me to understand collections were more than what you purchase. It's what you can publish and create and steward and make available openly. So I think that I don't think I'm alone in that sort of mental map shift and that change in sort of understanding of the landscape in which I was operating. That was, I think that's a change that libraries can make, sort of an understanding of the context that they navigate. I think that once there's that understanding of that context of this dual revolution, really changing sort of the relationships and where you're making partnerships. I think I really value the relationships I've had with sales representatives over the years from commercial publishers. Really, really warm and friendly, relationships. I look forward to working with these colleagues. But I think that giving more active attention with that equity mindset about who has power and who's represented, not represented, and really think, where are we working with nonprofit publishers? Where are we working with independent publishers? Where are we working with publishers that maybe don't have the resources to fund a large team of global sales agents, right? And really going the extra step to try to be inclusive and equitable, and try to be a bit more capacious in identifying the partners and potential partners to work with. I think that's something we could do more of in libraries. That's hard work, but it's something we could do more of. And I think that at a very, very operational level, and I try to do this did this actually at the MIT libraries, but I'd like to do it at a larger scale here at CRL, which is setting aside, creating carve-outs in quote unquote traditional collection budgets not for procurement of collections, but for the subsidizing and the creation of content. And that would be something like a direct to open model. Actually, that's not really procuring content. That's really doing a carve out and setting aside funds to help subsidize the creation of content. So I think the changes in libraries, maybe with an autobiographical sort of theme, is sort of understanding the landscape we're navigating. Once you understand that landscape, really actively reach out to partner with independent publishers and mission-driven publishers that may take extra legwork to identify and to work with. And then 3, creating resource carve-outs to support this kind of publishing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just to like jump in on those points, I think that we are seeing that. I mean, I think in the last, in terms of the incredible conversations we've had since we put direct to open out there, it's been incredible to see the different sizes and types of institutions that have responded. It's not just large, it's not just R1s. We have a good number of small institutions who are interested, institutions that have not who say when we have a conversation, we haven't supported open access before, we've wanted to, we're not sure, and that that they're diving into this model, and we really certainly appreciate it. I wanted to quickly jump on the question that Jenny's put in the chat about and for some reason, when I'm using this pathable chat, the chat disappears and I can't find the scroll bar to go back. So I can't find the full question. Maybe Beth's able to do that. But it's just a concern about, I guess the co-opting of open access or the fact that the worry that even open access can't get to the sort of answers to equity that you're sort of putting forward, Greg. But whether we think there are current models that are going to create decisive change in the field. And look, I think that there's a challenge here where, yes, open access has been around for a while now, and we all want faster change that we haven't yet seen. But I do think that in the last year, less than a year, we've seen University of Michigan Press come out with Fund to Mission for their monographs. We've seen Opening the Future, the model that's developed out of COPIM, and with Martin Eve, who I think has a panel up next, and Francis Pinter, that's being used now being implemented by Central European University Press in Liverpool, and Direct to Open. And these 3 books are really tackling the challenge for monographs. And I do think all 3 are models that are trying at least to put equity or questions, these issues of equity at the centre. We don't know yet what these models will look like or what the effect will be in 3, 5, 10 years. But I do think that we are seeing, growing partnerships in this with libraries, and a lot of good faith in libraries saying, look, we know that we're not immediately going to see an answer, but we feel like this is worth just, partnering with you and seeing where we go, and having some patience in trying these models as a potential solution, because we know that it's not, what we're doing now isn't working. So I think that those, I mean, I do have to say, I think these three models do present sort of robust ways forward for more equitable access to books, to monographs.
Yeah. I think you're right. And, I'll say that I think that there's huge appetite to see demonstrable change, and always this sense that we're not moving fast enough. We want to see more, this hunger, this appetite for more, which is good and healthy, and I certainly feel it myself. But I will say that that looking at listening to the keynote talk about creating thinking about libraries as a civilized, thinking about global civilization and change at that scale, and looking at all of the different panels exploring different models related to openness and open access. I see just a sea change in how the topics that have been covered at Charleston over the last 15 years, and so we are making progress. Maybe it's not as much as it's been a real delight to see. Yeah,
and I do think these newer models are asking for something of a culture change and a shift. Will they replace journals' APC models or transformative agreements? Look, we're likely to see, the existence of a number of models that do justice to different types of publications, and that, different publishers are going to be pursuing different approaches. And as Annie also says in the Pathable chat, it is important to take note that non-profit university presses are not all the same. As much as we also say, look, we're not the same as a really large commercial entity, we do have to say, look, MIT Press is certainly not representative of all university presses. As I said, one of the parts of the grant we got from Arcadia was that we'll be publishing a white paper in the next few weeks, sometime in November, provides a bit more detail of the model, that specifically the interest is to share those details with other university presses and society publishers, so that that information can be used where possible, so that other university presses can benefit from the experiment that we're working on. Because, it does require all sorts of things, including digital infrastructure that is not equally accessible to all publishers and all university presses. But then again, I guess I still think that there's also more room for collaboration with libraries in this space for university presses too. But yes, this certainly is not what we're doing. We would hope to see uptake from other university presses, but we are of a particular type and size.
That third question, and this is one that I would be happy to avoid it altogether, because how do you answer the assessment things? But we have to. So how do you measure and assess sustainability, transparency, equity? How do you measure and quantify success, progress? Are we done yet? No.
That's a hard one for sure. I mean, the sort of standard metrics that we've been using are already are a challenge for books. So, often, the questions we get from libraries about that sort of measurement, it's, well, what do the counter stats say? What do the downloads look like? And for monographs, that's challenging already, because downloads don't say anything about the value that each download stands for. Doesn't tell you about how it's used or how the content is used, or where, how much of a influence or impact it's made on somebody's research. But it is a small piece of the picture that's useful to look at. Also, with open access and the ways that we're able to look at download statistics, being able to look at the the broader geographic spread of downloads. I mean, I think that with open access, if we are seeing a broader usage geographically, that is a measure of success, I would say, where we are seeing, just broader usage where we know we wouldn't otherwise have, where there are, regions where libraries are otherwise not purchasing our books. That I think that's a measure of success when it comes to this sort of model. We also in a lot of cases just need better data to be able to measure the success. So, can we look at citation impact to some degree, but that's something we need to work on. I think also really importantly, over a few years' time, if we're still able to publish the number of monographs we publish now, that we are able to serve our authors in the way that we do and the way that they expect in terms of the high quality shepherding of our books and the editing, the sort of care that we put into our book program. If we are able to sustain that while publishing open access, that will be absolutely a marker of success. Those are a few things I think for on the university press side that we're looking at in terms of this model.
Yeah, I think that we all think really hard about success metrics and being able to demonstrate impact. We all have to do that, whether it's to a department head, to an AUL, to a dean, to a provost, university president. It's really being able to demonstrate progress against goals. But I think when I think about when I love numbers. I want data, as much data as I can get. But at the end of the day, the best thing I've ever read on assessment is Peter Drucker's book, Managing the Nonprofit. And there's a chapter on that called What's the Bottom Line When There Is No Bottom Line? Right. So if you're in a commercial environment, the bottom line is profit, right? Profit. But if you're in a nonprofit, right, what's the bottom line when there's no bottom line? And it's advancing against the mission. And so I think that when it comes to demonstrating impact or success, it's really trying to define what are your values and what's your mission. Is it just use? Is it just running counter reports and saying what are the hits on this? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's is it what percentage of your resources, whether collection budget or staff, are working on open access publishing ventures or models, or is it representation, racial, geographic, ethnic, among publishers? There are all sorts of different goals you may have. So I think defining what the mission is and what you want to achieve, what problems you want to make progress against, that's the critical thing. And then finding numbers that will help you track that. But assessment is just a tricky business. Yeah. But
we run up against that a lot where how do you move those collection dollars to open access and show value using the standard metrics that you usually would for acquisitions, and you sort of can't, right? I mean, you have to start looking at things through slightly different lens. If what is success under those terms when it's not just building your institution's individual collection, and when you're trying to shift towards more, say, collective behaviour, where we're saying we are working with libraries internationally together to make this content more accessible for everybody, and sort of trying to step out, using these models to step outside what often feels like a self-perpetuating system where the structures continue to propel these inequalities and inequities forward, right? Where, well, we can't invest the money because it's stuck inside a silo that can't be moved, which means that the models will fail because they can't break outside of them. And I think that, maybe a measure of success is just to say, look, we're seeing collective behaviour this is a change, and that matters. And so what next? Like, how do we harness more of this?
Oh my gosh, I hate to be the voice of doom here.
No.
We've talked too long.
Because this is so fascinating, but we are over time.
So I'll say, well, Emily, it was great seeing you, and I think it was I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope that resonated with some folks and gives us some enthusiasm to go to the next session. But thank you, Beth. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of conference.
Likewise, thank you all so much, and yeah, get in touch if you have more questions or you want to talk. We're always there. Let's see.
Thanks again.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.